Government takes care as much as we can to as many people as we can. At the end of the day, it cannot be growth for growth's sake. It has to be inclusive growth. We have seen improvements for the median income. During moments of crisis, all of us will put in our best to make sure that no one is left behind.
How do you then evaluate that there's net positive to Singaporeans? Welcome back to Chills with TFC. I'm your host, Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut. And today I am in studio with MOS Dinesh with all the very tough questions that we have gathered from all of you and all our hard work. So yes, Dinesh, for our audience that maybe for some reason they don't know you or you're doing too many things, maybe just an introduction.
Hi, my name is Dinesh. I'm the Minister of State for Manpower as well as MCCY, Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth. And I'm also the Mayor of the Southeast District.
What does MCCY do?
No, MCCY is...
on the street, it's termed as the everything ministry, right? Everything else, MCCY also got a cover, right? So this is not our... we didn't invite him because of MCCY, but just wanted to get that.
So MCCY is we're dealing with arts, culture, religious institutions, harmony circles. You're also dealing with sports, youth. So very vibrant ministry, huge portfolios. But these are really the community and the aspects of life which you need to also focus on.
So MOM does the not so fun stuff.
No, actually
the more
MOM
serious. You got to make the money, then you can have the fun. Right? So MOM does the serious stuff, right?
Yeah.
For our audience that, may not always be aware of what MOM actually does, right? So maybe, use it as a chance to educate us, like in your day-to-day with the ministry, what do you really care about?
So MOM deals, as the name suggests, everything and anything to do with human resource, manpower type issues. Maybe I'll give you an example and then that might be a bit better. If you know what's happening in the Middle East and you know that given the fact that there are troubles in certain countries, you know that many of the expatriates have left and that has created a certain vacuum. That's because certain countries have way more, foreign professionals in their midst. But in Singapore, for example, that is not the key because we focus a lot on the Singaporean core. And as we want to grow the economy, we then add on people who may be either on S-Pass or, EP holders and all the rest of it. So all the various passes are watched by MOM. Of course, you've got the work passes. These are construction workers and so on. Frankly, these are jobs that are very onerous and we want Singaporeans to have better jobs anyway. So as a result of that, we do need to have a layer of work pass holders and we have a sliver of people from the S-Pass and EP holders to augment the Singaporean core. If I compare it with other countries, what you really have is way more EP holders and S-Pass holders than their core. So when something happens there, this entire lot, they tend to be a bit more mobile, so they leave, and that results in a vacuum. So for us, we tend to moderate it. So sometimes I see some comparisons between countries and they say, oh, you got foreign professionals and so on. I think we take a much more balanced and a nuanced view. Okay, but anyway, we deal with all issues related to manpower policies in Singapore. There are a couple of statutory boards within MOM, including CPF and the Workforce Singapore for one.
Fair. And I genuinely don't think people are that concerned about the work permit situation, right? But
Yes,
people understand a bit, but the discussion is in the S-Pass, the EP, the whole dynamics, which we will go into later, right? Step by step, a lot of questions, different groups are involved. And since you kind of paint us a picture of like what is currently going on, right? How about let's go a little bit further on that ground, right? So because we hear, not just from this ministry, but from many others, and including our PM, the global world order, the unipolar moment has died and all that. And it's like, great. Okay, I hear you. I get it. But it's all very high up there, big words. And a lot of the people on the ground, like our listeners are wondering like, so what does that mean for us? Working professionals trying to make it work, living a good life in Singapore. What does that mean, right? So maybe give us a bit of sense on that ground. Yeah.
What you're observing that's happening at different parts of the world is that the existing order, which was predominantly run by the United States, that has had a couple of shifts. But then again, it's not because of one particular precedent or one particular person. There's been gradually, you're starting to see some shifts. Naturally, there's a bit of a inward look into the way in which, for example, the United States operates. But you're also starting to see the rise of powers in the East. So there's a bit of a difference as far as the geopolitical situation goes, and that results in interesting forms of competition that you'll see. Great powers will always have great power rivalry. We are not a great power. We are a small country.
We're a great merchant. We're trying to make this work.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as the geopolitical situation shifts, what we have noticed, and it's not only China and the US, but many other players as well, you notice that in the last couple of years, there had been a lot more conflicts that we are seeing, more than we have seen in years before, right? Country invading another country, for example, skirmishes that are happening, wars that are going on. For the longest time, we've had a couple of years or decades of, you could argue, while there were wars, they weren't very significant, and it didn't quite affect us as much, right? You could have a war in Africa or somewhere else, but between two neighboring states. But the stakes were not as high from a global standpoint. But increasingly, what you see is that there's some degree of contestation, and that results in certain conflicts that are happening. And there's a likelihood of the conflicts to spill over to this part of the region. Not from a military standpoint, but more from an economic standpoint. And therefore, we need to be sure that government is prepared. Government prepares people, and we are able to weather the storm. There's an African proverb that says, when the elephants fight, the grass is trampled. So we need to navigate and make sure that elephant don't step us. So that's what the role of how the government operates. At the same time, to be able to capitalize on opportunities despite difficulty, in order to be able to keep the situation in Singapore stable and as prosperous as we can. Now, having said that, that then results in a situation where it looks calm and dandy, right? So what is all this fuss about? I think that is the greatest challenge in trying to explain to people that, there are things that are happening, and there are all the mechanisms that we have are kicking into place to try to protect us. Hopefully no, goal gets scored against us, but by and large, we are keeping up our defenses to protect Singapore and Singaporeans. So that is the part where it's a bit difficult to explain, because it looks all calm, but then, there are stormy clouds all over the place. So how does it then affect us?
I'm not so sure if it really looks all calm. I think people are starting to see it, right? A little bit of
Yes.
this cost going up, this, that. I think the messaging also, it's getting a bit more direct, like things are really coming, it's really hitting. So that element, people start to see it. And even in the job market, you see so many big companies, letting off people. And I know it's a summation, right? Jobs created, you minus the jobs lost, and then you try to create this net increase, that whole bit, right? But what is actually going on, with this backdrop, right? With this backdrop of global contestation, how is it affecting the way companies are looking at job creation? How is it affecting the labor market? Or at least maybe some inklings of what you've already observed that you think the audience, should be aware.
Again, minus what's happening globally, if you look at the number of jobs that we have versus the number of Singaporeans, there are way more jobs than there are Singaporeans that are available. That's the first most important point. This is a very broad point. So if you go into certain specific sectors, it is true that you might find that there's a bit more contestation, there's a bit more retrenchments. But when we look at it from a global perspective, at least from a national angle, you don't quite see an uptick. It's not a significant uptick. There could be some variations and fluctuations here and there. You could argue that this is the early warning indicator of worse things to come, which is not wrong, but we have to continue to observe and see whether is that panning out or not. Often what I'm also noticing is there is overplay of certain, if there are certain sectors for which you find that there's not enough jobs, or if you have folks who may have a lot of trouble trying to land jobs, which is a fair point. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean that everything is sweet and dandy. Yeah. So there's a lot of people who may be falling into these categories, and that can be exacerbated by that folks in a certain sector. And that then results in the overall impression that there's a dearth of jobs. Wow, there's this, storm clouds coming. It is true. We are observing some storm clouds. We don't quite see anything raining yet, but we have to prepare for it. And I can talk about what are we doing to try to help some of those folks as well. But often what I notice is that it's about trying to match demand and supply. So there is people who are keen to look out for jobs, and there are jobs that are available. Now the question would be, how do you now best pair the two of them? It could be in a place where you may not be staying quite close to, for example. Or it could be a place where you say, well, I wish I was, well, somewhere around here, for example. But I'm going to a place that's slightly further away, more must take bus, must take train, so quite far away. May have to work shifts. I prefer not to work shifts. So those are the kind of expectations and preferences that we need to be mindful of. Sometimes if certain industries are a bit too crowded, there are a lot of adjacent or similar industries that one may want to consider too. May not have been your first choice, but this is something that you can start off with.
I mean, we meet a lot of headhunters, right? So we also know that over the past 2 years, finance and tech has been relatively slow. And those are the jobs that everyone wants that works in the CBD, well and beautiful, look good, go to work, right? No grease, no nothing, right? So that's the nice stuff. But many of the headhunters have also talked to us to say that, they struggle to get Singaporeans to go to Woodlands, to go to Jurong, to do the industry, to do the ports, do those other jobs which are objectively still pretty decent in terms of like pay. Ultimately, it's a lot about the pay range, right? Of course, finance and tech generally pay about 20-30% higher, in the similar role as compared to logistics industries, warehouse and all those kind of stuff. But still kind of works, right? But people are not going.
Yep.
Right. So maybe a bit of airtime, what are you guys trying to solve this matchmaking situation?
So a few things. I spoke to a lot of the trade
Yeah.
associations and chambers.
They
and
want to grow, they want to hire.
Exactly. So they are trying to find folks, and sometimes they have difficulty. It is also true that sometimes when our folks go for interviews, they may not get it. Some of them may not. And then that adds to frustration as well. But by and large, they are hiring. So there are a lot of people who are hiring. When you talk to industry, you realize that there's a need for people, right? Because our system has always been based on Singaporeans first. And if you're able to recruit the Singaporean, then that is indeed what we want our companies to do. Of course, there will be pockets of people who may choose to hire more foreigners and so on. We watch that very closely. And if we find that there are malpractices, then we step in, right? Especially if we find that there are, egregious HR practices in play and so on. But more importantly, I think it's about trying to make sure that our demand and supply engines are connected to one another. So Workforce Singapore, for example, does quite a bit of work in trying to make that connection between job seekers and jobs, for that matter. E2I under NTUC does a pretty good role in this as well. In fact, one of their tools is to use AI to be based on the skill sets of the employee, to then suggest to the employee where are those areas that they may be a better match for their skill sets and their qualifications and so forth. But most recently, I think it was October last year, we even have highlighted and launched local activities. This is where the role as a mayor helps a bit. So all the mayors are also now doing what's called jobs nearby. There are outlets that are available within the CDC where people can come in and ask for, and we try to help them pair for jobs as well. These are jobs that are within the vicinity. So I'm a mayor for Southeast. I've got opportunities in, for example, Changi Business Park, airport, and airport is expanding as well. So all those areas are ways at which we can pair. So if you're living in the East, and to go to Changi Business Park or airport will then reduce your commute time, which is beneficial to all. Going back to your point about jobs that may be far-flung.
I mean, I used to stay in Tampines, so I always find it very useful to work in Changi, but, look at where I am. I want to dig into that bit about HR practices, right? So, maybe it's another myth that you want to dispel, right? Which is, there are all these companies that are in Singapore and then they are so-called hiring, but actually they end up choosing foreign workers, whether it's S-Pass, E-Pass, foreigners, as compared to the Singaporean lah. So the myth is Singaporeans are, choosy, lazy, it's better to hire the foreigners. And I mean, you hear these things, right? But you probably have a, data set to view this, right? When it comes to all these HR practices, there's also that little story of like, we will hunt down this horrible HR practices, right? Whoever that is doing this, I mean, I've heard it multiple times, coming from the ministry. So just wanted to get a sense, like, how often do these things, arise, where there are such HR practices, like how often do you catch these things? And what do you really do when you observe some companies that, but we're just going to play this game and hire foreigners? Yeah.
Often it's important to get the facts correct, because otherwise it will be to the person who may be in a situation and you see certain things happening. It is very natural to make a certain conclusion that there's some bias, right? Why is this guy or this group from a particular part of the world coming over? And why are they coming over in larger numbers compared to other parts of the world, or to have a more diverse workforce or whatever? There could be some truth to that. It could be because there's absolutely perfectly fine. They tried recruiting from Singapore. They couldn't find folks, and therefore they end up looking overseas, which is, by the way, the approach. We try to recruit from within. If they've demonstrated that they can't, then they're allowed to recruit from overseas. There could be people who game this too, right? I can just pretend I try to recruit locally, and then I can't find enough folks, or I choose not to take the local folks, and then I go for folks who may be more compliant, more similar to me, and so on. So these are if such practices are noted, it is perfectly normal for the public to get in touch with MOM through TAFEP to highlight that there are malpractices and there's a unfairness, that's a perceived unfairness, and leave it to TAFEP to then do an investigation. And that's how so whistleblowing is a useful mechanism in this regard. But I just want to moderate that to say, please check properly first, because if there's a whole flood of egregious cases, then the real ones don't get covered, because there's a limited capacity of how the officers and the investigators.
Suddenly this episode go up, then the TAFEP hotline
explode.
explode.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, but okay, it's good to know that whistleblowing is accepted and welcome through an agency.
So I would like to also add that as we bring in folks into Singapore, firstly, it is to shore up our economy and to be able to have better growth so that all Singaporeans benefit. Step one. Step two, the way in which MOM does it is also through what's called the compass framework, where we look at multiple parameters and we try to keep some degree of balance so that it doesn't run out of whack. So there are frameworks in place to hold companies under. But ultimately, it's also not in Singapore's interest to be overly restrictive, because if we are growing, then there's no reason for us to say, well, I would like to grow, but then, it only has to be Singaporeans and nobody else. Because when that happens, then it could be a case where if they can't find Singaporeans, they can't grow, and therefore we are all affected anyway. So we'll have to always moderate between growth of companies and fairness to Singaporeans.
Then there's this difficult element of like, how do you then evaluate that there's net positive to Singaporeans, right? Because I think there is also a fear if you allow too many foreigners to come in,
yes,
in a short period of time, it artificially depresses the local wage environment, then affects the quality of life
yes,
for a lot of working professionals, right? I mean, you start to see this stratification. I think that's a fair statement, because Ministry of Finance have published a report, right, to show the inequality. But all that high level things aside, people are just genuinely very concerned
yes,
that if all these foreigners come in and they affect the job market may not be by way of stealing your jobs, but by way of creating an artificial, like wage suppressant, such that my wage don't grow. I got a job, it be same job, but my wage is not growing because there's like company can hire outsiders in that sense, right? And then my wage is not growing, and then it's affecting my way of life because cost of living is going up.
understand.
Right. So there's this set of concerns, and so I want to tie it in to understand, like, what does it mean then, right?
So we look at the data nationally and we observe what's called the median income, which means the average wage, to put it very bluntly, and to see whether is there growth as far as the median income is concerned. We have seen improvements for the median income. So I think last year was about 7%. So we do see, in general, growth as a result of either, in terms of your increments, etc., etc. On the average, so of course it would not apply to every single person, but when you aggregate it, you do see a growth in the median income. We watch this very closely because when we talk about cost of living, etc., it all has to be tied in towards wage growth. And we're talking about here real wage growth. So it's not just, I mean, we could then argue about inflation and all the rest of it. So it's really about real wage growth. We need to see an increase. At the same time, we also look at the bottom 20%. And we need to make sure that the bottom 20% does not, the two trajectories don't deviate. Because when it deviates, that's when the real problem takes place. For the bottom 20%, the growth has been 10%. So we are starting to see a narrowing. Now, sure or not, how do you know whether got this thing real or not, right? So we do, if you notice that there was a paper by MOF earlier in the year, and MOF has also indicated that the wealth inequality between, in terms of Singaporeans in general, has narrowed. So if you go back a couple of years ago, the what's called the Gini coefficient used to be a lot more wider, and now it's getting a bit more closer. So that's the macro perspective, lah. Okay, where actually you're starting to see people who if you, as a median income, it's growing, uh, bottom 20% growing a bit faster. And that should be the way, because you want to keep a tighter compact. You don't want the society to fray, right? So that's the whole perspective of why we watch this. Of course, that's also tied to, for example, general prices, inflation, cost of living, cost of houses, etc. Because if one overtakes the other and one going like rocket, the other one going like an aircraft, then something is wrong. So we need to make sure that they're all pretty much in line. So that's the macro. Foreigners coming in, whether does it suppress your local wages? I do think at certain points, certain jobs, the answer might be yes. So for example, I might be a plumber or an electrician, and then I realize that, wow, there's this fella coming in who is probably getting a slightly lower wage than the rest. By the way, that that scenario that I highlighted need not be for local versus foreign alone. It could very well be I do a lot of work in the senior care space. It could very well be a newbie versus an old timer. You have the same problem because one person's wage may be higher, the other one may be lower, and therefore the company will have to make decisions, and this guy gets, unfortunately, not quite continual, and therefore the next fellow comes in. But the key, and this is where it's important, is that you need to make sure that workers in general, we continue to upskill and we continue to pick up new skills and grow. So you cannot also rest on your laurels, lah. Must pick up certain skills. Now got AI and all this. I'm sure you'll ask me this later, but I better volunteer myself first. But anyway, the whole idea is, you pick up skills, try to learn new stuff, dabble in areas that you may not be very familiar with, take up courses, etc. And you can move up the value chain in that way. Because it's very difficult to remain in a particular job and get increments over the years, and then you hope that will be the case forever and ever. There's no certainty, lah. So the best way would be to learn new skills and aim for something else. Aim for a higher job, upskill yourself. And there are a whole host of policy announcements we've had over Budget COS to facilitate this movement, particularly for the median and the lower income folks. And if you do that, you do not worry too much about substitution because you're moving up. So it's a good thing to have. I know for certain archetypes, easier said than done, but I think we all stand together to find ways at which we allow our people to upskill and move to higher jobs. That must be the objective of government, and that must be the objective of all of us. At the end of the day, it cannot be growth for growth's sake. It has to be inclusive growth, and we must make sure that Singaporeans are benefiting from this entire process too. I will add at the end of the day that there will always be a certain sliver of folks who, either because of circumstances or just unlucky or whatever, may fall into a certain void, and you find that there's a lot of trouble trying to get out of it. And this is where we need community to come in to try to support. There's no way that MOM's magical policies will be able to solve all problems. We do need community to come into.
So maybe one question, just so I hear from you, right? Because you said real wage growth, but in Singapore, when we measure CPI, we actually don't measure property prices, right? As part of the CPI element. And I think property prices have have created quite an anxiety. This is not
Ah,
your
yes.
your worldview, right? I mean, it's not part of this thing, but about the whole upskilling side of
Yes.
things, right? So I think it's needless to say, upskilling is very painful, right? You learn new things, it's especially I think as you kind of grow older, the I don't know, is it the neuroplasticity or whatever you're just bogged down with a lot of stuff, learning new things, taking time off and all that, gets harder and tougher and it's just more painful. And I know the ministry has put up all this kind of like a level up program, wage support, so that you can kind of really step back from full time work or step back from your work to just focus on learning, right? So well and good. No more marketing for that, okay? Okay. But I do want to hear this bit about like the effectiveness of upskilling, right? Yeah, because ultimately we don't want to get lost in that, process, right? What we want is to, if somebody for in the process of their career falls through, we want to be able to build that basis for them to then take on to the next thing, right? Or like divert to the next thing, or even move further up, right? So I think that's where we want. And Skills Future, which also not in this ministry, but will soon be merged, right? I don't know what's gonna happen there, so please don't mark him on this, right? Okay, this is a evolving situation, okay? But that has been the mantra
Yes.
for a while, right? Learn, upskill, pivot, change. The word on the ground is, this is, does it really work, right? And I will bring in the comparison as to place and train, right? Because place and train has a much better outcome based on what a lot of people are saying, and I don't know if you have data sets to tell us, which is essentially we're trying to push people into another place to then sit inside for a longer period. You learn. Hopefully, you get entrenched in the company's processes and they cannot just switch you out so easily. And then they will figure a role for you, even though that this role that you so called place and train for doesn't really exist after this process, right? Because personally, I mean, even for us, we have done it, right? So gotten somebody in, and after that process, we're like, we really love this guy, we can trust, but this role doesn't, it's like experimental. How about let's do a few things and create a role for him or her, right? So what is this like? On one hand, there's this like upskilling thing. On the other hand, there's a policy that looks like it works better, place and train and more like so-called better outcome, at least word from the ground. What is your read on this thing, and how does this dynamic kind of work?
Maybe I start with an anecdote, then I go back to your place and train,
Sure.
and then we talk from there.
Yeah.
I used to be from the army, and I was actually supposed to join the private sector. So I resigned from the army. I had to go into a job that I knew. I mean, I wasn't in the job yet, but at that point, I was very worried because I don't know how I will operate. I cannot go there and, self-destruct within like 6 months.
I know you
And
cannot bring your military energy into
precisely, and that
private
might be
space.
very, very
Very
detrimental.
detrimental. Cultural no fit, this one.
So I had to go to SMU and I took a couple of 2 to 3 day type courses, short courses, to learn more about the sector that I was going to. I eventually didn't end up going there, but that was because of COVID lah. So I've left and then I was asked to then join MOH. But that aside, truth be told, that the couple of courses, I think I took about 3 or 4 short courses, So you got to apply for your own leave, you got to go down and go for your training. I mean, you pick up knowledge and so on. Is it useful? Supremely useful because you are learning from the best. SMU is a very good university. In fact, all our universities are world class. So there are ways at which we can go back to the university, take short courses, upskill yourself in that sense. Not just universities. I think our polytechnics, ITEs are all punching way above their weight, and they do have courses that are available. Many of us do take. I know of many of my friends doing night courses, either at ITE or polytechnic and so on. All this is important to then give you more toolkits in your tool bag, or more tools in your toolkit, so that you are able to then, when need to deploy and go somewhere else, at least you have something instead of one trick pony lah. So you need to be able to get more toolkits or tools in your toolkit so that you are able to then apply it to your new job. I felt that the process of going for those short courses at SMU where I went for Very useful. So I'd encourage it doesn't mean SMU or university alone. It means that anyone who goes to our institutes of higher learning and taking up courses there will benefit. I think that is a given. The second part of it is once you get that training, do you then get placed to a higher job or not? Again, it depends on a variety of scenarios. But if you are performing well and you have now additional certificates and you have demonstrated potential and people see you and they say, hey, this fellow is very good, what? So why don't we put him up for a higher appointment? It would come naturally, frankly, because at the end of the day, even if your company does not recognize your certificates and skills, surely some other company would. So it's not like I was become one particular pathway within the company itself. I can always go to another company. So that fluidity helps. So that's the first point. Your second point was about new entrants and whether or not an internship type of a model, what you call place and train, then allows them to hold.
Or even mid-career, right? There's
Or
also that
mid-careers
element.
as well.
Yes.
A personal view that works very well. Although in the short term, you might say, well, I just get an allowance, I don't get my full job. But look at it this way. The employer is investing in you as well, The employer also is not just paying you, but they're also investing you to be part of it. You'll be there, you can see whatever that's going on. It is not in their interest to train you up and you join a competitor, right? So it makes perfect sense to be in a place and train, or in terms of what the ministry has most recently come up with called the GRIT, the Graduate Internship and Traineeship Program, because that then allows for people to go in, you learn, and then you glide into a most importantly, it allows you to also understand the organizational culture. And you can choose whether you want to carry on or not. So there's a lot of optionality that's available, which is in the benefit of the employees. The employees would always feel that, oh, I go there, then I cannot exploit it for 6 months, then I cannot kick out. I mean, quite frankly, the data doesn't show that. Most of people who invest in it, they would have done their upfront screening to ensure that folks coming in would work in their system, and hence they invest in the training. Because again, the whole purpose of internships is to upskill people as they go. So those are archetypes that I thought would be helpful, especially to allay the anxiety of whether or not you want to upskill. Now, my last point, follow your heart. Follow your heart. I don't know how you ended up in this business. You're obviously doing a good job.
Thank you.
But the fact of the matter is, it must have been a bold step for you, but you followed your heart. And I think that is the key that we want everyone to do. Don't chase the dollar. Follow what is you think resonates with your character, your personality, jobs that you truly are passionate about, and then train yourself towards that. I think that part is very important. Otherwise, you train for the wrong job. It's like a square peg in a round hole, Not very helpful.
I love that anecdote. I think it goes to show how you think of it. Depends on where you are, your archetype, your situation. You can be strategic about this thing,
Yes.
right? Don't just take the messaging in one way, right? Like there are different ways, play your cards, there are different ways to go about this, right? So maybe we take a slight, then I want to spend, okay, the SME bosses, I'm coming, okay, right? So we are going there. But I do want to take a little slight tangent into the young graduates, right? Because you brought up grit, and I think Minister Tan See Leng also talked a little bit about this whole program and how the MOM was ready to expand if you saw that there is a situation here where our young people are not getting employed fast enough, and then you will kind of work through this system. So that's kind of the thought process. I want to understand from your point of view, what is your read of the young graduates, today? Because there's all sorts of different data sets that's flying around, and there's all sorts of discussion. Our generation spend too much time on the internet and the forums talking about things, right? So sometimes it does look a bit amplified, but how do you read the situation of young graduates, and what would be your advice?
For young graduates, most of them, a vast majority, gets a job in less than a year. By 9 months, you should be able to get a job. Most of them, I'd say. Again, I want to caveat that on a couple of archetypes. First, if everybody rushes to a particular sector, let's say IT, finance, as you highlighted, there could be a situation where you find it difficult to land jobs by virtue of the fact that maybe there's some dynamics going on inside there, or you don't have enough opportunities. Maybe people from mid-careers are trying to go there as well. A bit of contestation. But if you look at the job market as a whole, enough opportunities out there as well. So to the young, I'd say let's try follow your heart, try to do something. Don't just chase the dollar. Follow something that resonates with you. If you think you'd like to take a step into a slightly different sector, something that you are your qualifications are valid, but it might be something that you didn't quite consider to begin with, but you wouldn't mind because that's been within you anyway, then that's worth considering, and that there is indeed space for that. So that is one part which I think needs to be highlighted, because if not, everybody thinks that wow, the whole job market is in big trouble and so on. I spoke to a group of young people the other day, and they highlighted the same, wow, don't have lah, and they felt very upset. So I said, what caused you to be upset? So often what happens is that a few people go for an interview together, one person lands the job, obviously the other one doesn't lah. But what happens, which amplifies stuff, is the person who lands the job changes their LinkedIn profile, or they change to whatever, and that then becomes another source of or puts a gloating post on social media to say, oh, first day, here I am with my gourmet coffee and
Learning
stuff
all
like
the
that.
bad things on LinkedIn. So everything on LinkedIn is like, oh, appreciate the company.
To be honest, it's all of social media,
Yes,
right?
yes,
It
yes.
gives you a very glossy view to the world, when actually there's a lot of warts and all, but people only see the good stuff, right? So when you compare yourself with that, naturally there'll be a tendency to say, wow, I went for the same job interview, but I didn't get it. Then that causes further exacerbation. This is normal. And I think I can fully understand why it happens that way. But there are people to help. So it's useful can get in touch with E2I, WSG, jobs nearby. There are many people on the ground who are willing to help our graduates, and not just graduates, but our workers in general land jobs. And there are options that are available. Keep an open mind. Don't have too high requirements and so forth. And I'm sure you'll get one.
I want to note on your reference, which is a 12-month cycle.
Yes.
Right? Because I remember back then when we were in university, or for the last 10 years, there are all these like big posters that I was like, SMU love this very big poster. 100% employed in less than 6 months. That poster has since disappeared. From a 6-month cycle to a 12-month cycle. The 6 months used to be the reference, right? Like when you graduate in 6 months, you get a job. Now it sounds like in 12 months, it still works. The numbers still add up. And from your position, your point of view in the ministry, you think that's okay. Like instead of 6 months, 12 months, okay lah, we still can manage, because more intervention can create other problems, right? So just want to hear your point of view on this.
I think two aspects. First, whether or not companies are starting to slow down some of their hiring in anticipation for bad times ahead. Again, this is a call that the companies will have to make. If you get it wrong, then your competitors will win, right? They didn't reduce their strength. So suddenly you realize, hey, there's no downturn. It's going up and away, and end up your competitors will run 10 times faster than you. So these are company decisions that they'll have to make as to whether or not they downsize or they dial back on their hiring, which will affect, of course, our new graduates coming out. The second part of it is there's naturally an anxiety after a certain mark. I don't think it's about whether is it 6 months or 3 months, or there'll be a never-ending kind of a cycle. But if I remember correctly, the universities measure it at 6 months, 9 months, and a year. And by 9 months to a year, most of them get a job anyway. So it's not 12 months. I added a 3-month KS factor. But anyway, most of them do get their jobs in a certain time. It does not mean that everyone will get their jobs, because some may decide to take a gap year. Some of them may unfortunately not be able to land jobs. And therefore, when that happens and you're at the tail end of it, the anxiety will go up. That's fair. That is absolutely fair. So we will have to then figure ways at which we can help some of those who may be in that side of the house. For some reason or the other, maybe they bungle the interview or whatever, they end up not quite landing their jobs fast enough. Or maybe they were a bit too fussy. Maybe they were a bit too choosy. So hence, as in all cases, it's about how you make your decisions and how quickly you pivot, and don't lose heart, because there are jobs that are available. There are people to help you. So I wouldn't be too concerned. I'd say that if you let it get to your head and you let the negativity get the better of you, then it won't be helpful.
Now we look at the SME. So the Singapore market, based on a lot of the jobs, is very much tied to this whole MNC ecosystem where foreign companies come in, they establish their HQ here, they build that whole thing. And of course, we have SMEs to support them. I know they form 70% of the market, but a lot of them, it's also tied to that vein of the MNC ecosystem. But on the SME side of the bucket, right, you see a lot of SMEs these days shutting down, right? And there are all sorts of reasons, right? So I want to hear your point of view because, you know, some people will say like, oh, it's because of the rental going up, you know, which of course you see shop house prices transacting at, you know, top dollar, 50% increment,
Yes.
all that. So there's that one bit. But I know Prime Minister Lawrence came out and said, oh, rental is broadly okay, you know, that there's also that bit, which, you know, yeah. So that's one point of view. I'm not questioning our Prime Minister. No, that's one point of view, which I think can be substantiated because of, you know, HDB, you know, JTC. We do have some controls over rent in a wider landscape. But then the question would be, if it's not rent, then if it's cost inputs, then it's like food costs or like, you know, product input cost relative to like labor cost, right? And then of course there's the revenue side of the house, right? So how do you kind of tell these SME bosses, you know, to manage this business? What advice would you have, right? And also tying it back to the net wage increment, because from M1 report, wages are going up, right? And from SME bosses, everything is going up, wage going up, rent going up, everything going up. It's getting tougher. So what would you tell them?
The SME space is rather diverse. So I would not be able to give you a one medicine to
course.
solve all the problem.
Yeah.
You know. But I think what's most important is it is true that costs is going up, and so too are rentals, labor costs, etc. But your product costs or your sales costs also should be going up in tandem, lah. Must be, right? So therefore, unless you're in a business where everything else is going up, but your sales cost or your sales prices are the same and your volume continues to stagnate, then it implies that something is not quite right with the business. I hate to say it, but that might be the problem. So sometimes it's useful to. I think there are a few levels inside here. The first one is if the business model works, and even if you're an SME, you can still grow. It's a function of how you position your growth, whether or not you make it use, for example, productivity enhancements and so forth. There are funds that MOM provides to allow our SMEs to upskill and to be able to reap the enterprise workforce transformation rewards and dividends that you can get by transforming your organization to make it a bit more efficient. It could mean reducing costs. Today, in the age of AI, it could mean using AI, etc., to be an extender to allow for your scale to go up. So it shouldn't be a case of comparing your cost versus looking at your revenue side of your balance sheet. So there are a lot of interventions you can do at the revenue side, together with government interventions that help you find ways to boost your revenue. So that must be the approach that we must keep in order to help SMEs. In certain areas, you might have reached a peak of your revenue. Then you got to ask yourself whether is the business model correct, and what exactly went on, and why is it that you aren't able to scale up your revenue. And then when that happens, you realize that, it's like you find the ground coming faster and faster, you worry, and then at some point you have to decide whether or not you bail out, right? That's the reality of how it works. But so that is a separate discussion that the SMEs will be in the best position to then decide what works for them best. Again, there are multiple tools and grants that are available, both in terms of Enterprise Singapore, MOM, etc., to help our SMEs. Because the idea of what we are trying to do in government is really to encourage our SMEs to stay afloat and to thrive. If you can leverage off workforce transformations or enterprise transformations or embracing of new technology to be able to grow, then that's exactly what we want to see too. And if that then allows the SME to become larger in size and be able to then grow, best for everybody. So because when the SMEs do that, assuming all our SMEs are able to grow, then more people you'll have to hire, right? So when you hire more people, government won't have a problem with that. In fact, it's better for government too. So that is what we're also trying to do. But there will be naturally a stratification, and there'll be some folks who are caught. And either because of their business model or maybe the profile of the company, profile of the owners, etc., if they do not transform or adjust fast enough, then there could be a risk of increasing costs, shaving off earnings. And that's a reality lah. So we then have to decide whether you continue or you pivot your business to something else. And again, business transformation is part and parcel of the evolution of business anyway. And we are a business nation from the start. So it's something that we will have to see as it happens. But even then, there are mechanisms that help. The unions are also available to provide some support and so on, pivot if need be. So there are things that government and unions can do to support our SMEs.
I think everybody, whoever that runs government, would love to see more local champions. You want to see, local SMEs that grow to become giants, and there's a lot of net benefit, whether is it pride, whether is it entrenchment of like capital locally so that you build up the base, with not just relying on foreigners, right? So, or even foreign money and foreign businesses, right? So everybody wants that local bit to thrive, right? And I mean, the government has talked about this, until the cow come home, right? It's like, oh, so much talk over so many years. And even the recent COS, there was also this discussion of like more funding to support SME growth. Of course, not all categories are the same. I understand it's a big space, and different segments. But it's quite questionable in a sense of like the growth, of the SME category. Like we've been trying for so long and so many things, so many ways. Like we don't really see a lot of like big growth, big activity, big developments, or maybe I'm missing something. Just want to hear like what is the problem here, right? Like why are our local champions or our local SMEs not growing at this miracle thought that we would like it to have, right? What's your read?
So as part of the Economic Strategies Review Committee, which I also sit
He
on.
wears too many hats.
Yes. But it's interesting because I see different parts. I meet
Exactly,
many people,
exactly,
and
yeah.
I'm able to then kind of join the dots somewhat. But from the perspective of businesses, for example, we've had our fair successes. So in my committee, we have Carousel. So Carousel sits on our committee, and that's been listed, and it's been doing quite well. We have the founder of Love Bonito, which is a boutique outlet. We have Castlery. All these are Singaporean brands, and they have been doing quite well, not only within Singapore, but regionally as well. So we do tap on their knowledge, their experience, and what else can we do to kind of level up the playing space. Would everybody be a billion-dollar company, or be able to list successfully and be able to then grow to other parts of the world? It really depends on multiple factors. But what has happened most recently is, number one, government has put in money to facilitate the growth of companies that are showing promise. And this was announced by PM Lawrence Wong in February, in March during budget COS. So that has indicated that is an area where we're putting money into the situation, and even within the equities market, there's a EQDP, as you are fully aware, that allows for more funding into the local stock market so that it provides for further incentives for people to want to list their companies locally. But the decision to list is one that is very much personal to companies. As they grow and they reach a certain size, do they want to take it public? Do they want to keep it as they are, and so forth? So there's one dimension of allowing companies that are showing promise to latch onto programs that are available through ESG, Enterprise Singapore, and so on, to be able to then take that next leap. So there are programs that are available. If I swim a bit downstream, even among the universities and polytechnics, there are entrepreneurship programs. And in NUS and NTU, I believe they've sent their budding entrepreneurs to Silicon Valley to mix around and understand how the situation is and get a bit of the vibe, and then come back and develop their ideas more. This is exactly what happened to some of our founders, some of whom I've highlighted earlier. So there are good grooming programs, but we do need to do more of that. We do see the fact that people who have SMEs, and if they're growing well, to want to then list and take it to the next level. We do need to see companies coming into Singapore too, because sometimes it is beneficial to all. You may have a fellow coming in with a separate type of technology, separate type of business, and so on, which is complementary to what we do locally too. So when that happens, the entire ecosystem also grows. While there's some initial signs that indicate that because of what's happening around the world, people are viewing Singapore as a safe haven. And there are some folks who are willing to come here and set up their shops here. Now, setting up a shop of a foreigner or foreign company in Singapore shouldn't be frowned upon because they will have to hire locals anyway. So it is beneficial to locals too. And you will have venture capitalists coming in to then say, oh, I see this fellow chap, you're doing quite well. I put some money over to you, give you a bit of a boost and grow. And at some point, as you grow, I also want to recycle my capital, right? I don't want to kena sangkut with one person throughout. I want to get out
That
of
is
it.
their business model, right?
Yes, and then I take a percentage cut of your business. You now starting to grow, so you carry on. I take away my the amount that I put in. I then look for the next guy to reinvest. That is another area that we're also trying to pay particular attention and focus to. So that is how we grow the ecosystem to allow our young plants to grow into big trees. And at the same time, as we harvest, we make sure that we then recycle capital to other plantations or other plots so that we can then grow further and bigger trees there too. So that's how we see the entire situation as growing. And it looks, as I said, that we are in a privileged position given what's happening around the world.
So I think the capital bit, right, it's quite obvious, right? Like it's really happening, like STI all-time high, everybody is very happy, So that whole bit, and I'm hearing more listing activity, right? I'm in more meetings on all these stuff. So I know that whole bit is moving, right? So, but I would like to kind of ask a little bit more on, like, are there any other structural situations, right? Like capital is one thing, right? And we have a lot of money sitting around, right? I think that's a fair statement. We have a lot of big family offices, VCs, there has always been money. The government putting in money to initiate that engine, okay, great. It works, it's moving, okay, good. But then the structural elements, do you observe certain things that you would love to adjust to then promote this deal flow, right? This cycle where companies can actually grow, right? And not just be stratified, even in their own spaces.
From my perspective, the one key thing that we need to jazz up a bit more is the entrepreneurship culture. We need to start earlier. We want our children to have that drive within them to try different things, to observe problems around the world, observe problems within Singapore, come up with novel ideas that they can develop. The one thing about Singapore, as they say, when you have lemons, make lemonade. Somehow or other, sometimes we have a lot of lemons because we have a lot of vulnerabilities. We have a lot of, we are given the shorter end of the stick most of the time. But we're very good at making lemonade and we're very good at exporting lemonade too. So that's what we want to see. Us taking a limitation, taking a vulnerability, converting the vulnerability into a strength, and then exporting it to the wider world. That is in itself a business model. How do you start from young? Today, as I said, the universities have got decent programs of immersion with Silicon Valley, et cetera, et cetera. I do think we need to take a step further. So we got to start at the late secondary, early junior college type of a setting or polytechnic. One of my committee members, Wilson Chocha, he decided to put his own money in, right? So he crowdsourced a couple amount of money, and he has a program for children between the ages of 14 to 18. We selected 100 this time round, and it's called My First $1,000. So the story is, I give you $250, you do what you want to do. If you grow, and you must return back capital, I must train the kids to return capital with interest, no free lunch, So they have to return back the money. If your business doesn't work and you dry up your $250, no problem. You lose $250, you don't get your upside, but you go back with a lot of experience and war stories, which is great. Those who do well can get up to a dollar for dollar matching to $1,000. Now, to a 14 to 18-year-old, it's not small money. It's decent, and it's something that is worth. In fact, when we opened up this, when East Ventures, who are doing this thing, decided to open it up to the public, the response was overwhelming. More than the 100, we had to stop or they had to stop the number of people subscribing because overshot already. They're planning to do this even bigger next year. So I think, and therefore, what's the point? The point is that you do see that drive among kids, and they have got an amazing view of problems that they see in their eyes and solutions to solve that problem. So if we can try to jumpstart that at an early age, and then you go to a course in the university or polytechnic that you're passionate about, you then learn more about it, you can come out and you can very well be an entrepreneur. Your risk as a very young person joining the entrepreneurship space is much lower, right? Ideally, we should see this in every age segment. Doesn't matter to me if you're a senior, but if you want to go in and dabble with a bit of AI, get into a kind of a business model, or try to dabble in some entrepreneurship, we should encourage that. If people who may not have been successful in their jobs prefer to be their own boss, why not try entrepreneurship too? Why not be an entrepreneur? That has been the national DNA anyway. So it's about trying to create multiple pathways to allow people to allow that culture to fit in. We must be ready to accept some losses. Not every entrepreneur will succeed, or not every entrepreneur will succeed the first time. But surely over time and after successive lessons, you learn and then you get better at it. And that's how you grow the next round of entrepreneurs that we have. Otherwise, it's too small a pool. You may not get enough. There may be certain signs of greatness, but you have to expand that. And that only happens if you start early and expand the culture.
In fact, there's probably a higher success rate for people that start, at an older age, right? I mean, but the statistics does show that seniors do better, in terms of, because they understand the landscape, they know the people and all that. So on that note, I want to ask you on placemaking, right? Essentially, setting culture is a lot about placemaking. And great, like we have all these young people stuff, sorry, young is great, right? All the initiatives. But there are actually a lot of corporate professionals that have this like little hurdle of like trying to do their own thing, because they are in the corporate grind, right? And I've always thought like maybe One North should move to the CBD, right? Because One North started the JTC Launchpad, right? It started as a reuse of an old, property, right? Because back then all the changes, so there's this little build up, and they've built it up to whatever they can, right? And I know there's a whole new, exciting, furnishing up, and then there was a launch and all that at One North, right? But as an entrepreneur that has been at One North, it's very far, and that's not the thing, and that's not just the thing. I realized that if you don't see something every day, or you don't see it prominently, it's not in your psyche. You don't think about it, So, in my point of view, like, One North JTC Launchpad should be at Shenton Way, But then that is the sacrifice as a nation in terms of rent. Not saying you have to commit to anything.
I shall not say anything.
Yeah. No, but in the vein of placemaking, right? In the vein of building an entrepreneurship culture, shouldn't entrepreneurship be in the heart of the city center and not just be left in some of these iconic things on the side? I know we got SG Innovate, a little shop house in the middle of town, but I wonder about this.
Few ways to unpack it. Frankly, the One North at or Ayer Rajah area is not really very far away, lah. But of course, you don't get the kind of view that you get from CBD, for example, right? So that part is a fair point. And it's about whether is the air here different, or the water here different or something, or whether is it just about proximity. But I would have thought, frankly, the getting complementary businesses, getting complementary entrepreneurs in one location, right, has a greater chance of there being success stories, or at least some degree of collaboration. You do something, I do something, you succeed. Hey, I tumpang you, we also succeed. That kind of stuff is more helpful, and that is indeed what we are trying to do, lah. Whether be it in One North or elsewhere, but or JTC Launchpad, for example, it's because we think that co-location helps. Co-location also helps if you want to have shared services, right? So if you want to do HR, you want to do your finances, etc., you can learn off one another. You can have ways at which you can have synergy, lah. So that's how it is. Whether is it located plus minus 5 kilometers away from where we are, depends. So I think there's a way we can vary that one. Not really because of cost of rentals per se, because actually if you look at it, Ayer Rajah also not really low, lah, quite high also, rentals. But
now it's much higher.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's something that it was an intentional decision to do it in that way, right? And then we build on our successes inside there. But more importantly, it's about that co-location of services. And the whole idea is to create a vibe. And one could argue that, well, it's also quite near the university, quite near the, biomedical hubs and so forth. So there's a bit of a vibe that's going on there. But notwithstanding, really depends on what you're going to do. I don't think what you're saying is wrong. I do think that at the end of the day, if you have multiple launch pads, that are purpose built, and you can find the same formula of aggregating, then I think we'll be successful.
If we believe that that is the way forward for our nation to move up the value chain, then I think that there's something to be done in terms of placemaking and culture building, right? Because I think you've pinpointed the element of culture, and it's actually a lot more complicated than just throwing money at something, right? And I see that you get the nuance and you're working on it. Hope to see it in Shenton Way. No? or something somewhere in town, not for the proximity sake, but I feel like it is about seeing it every day. It's like if I come to Raffles Place, and then I'm super jaded with my work, but everybody around is the same. I don't see a way out. But if there is this launch pad that is just opposite Boat Key, right? And then I see everybody there, very happy doing the grind and trying to grow their own thing because they take ownership. That, in itself is culture building.
So the other part of it, which I think is also might be useful, would be not all entrepreneurs need to be in one kampong.
Of course.
So if you are, for example, doing retail, what would be useful is to really be where the people are, right? And to be in either in malls or in the CBD area, so that you can then test out. And if assuming you get some discounts in rentals and you're able to try, and even if it doesn't work out, at least the fall is cushioned. You won't have to have a heavy fall. Those are some areas we're also looking at. So it's a kind of a mixed bag between retail as well as other forms of entrepreneurship.
Maybe any last shout out to a particular initiative that you love, that you think more working professionals should get in touch with, maybe just one last little bit.
I would say that government thinks very long term. And that's the unique part of what we have in Singapore, where you have a government that really takes a very long view to the world and is genuinely interested in the well-being of Singaporeans. I would strongly urge everyone to do your checks and to try, because there are a lot of opportunities and there are many, many people who can help people who might be in need. If you have a certain situation, it doesn't mean that that's the end of it and that no one is here to support, even during times of crisis. So I'll add that, and I had this story before, I might as well say it here. I told you that I was supposed to go to the private sector. I ended up going to MOH, right? So because it was during COVID and they needed someone to run the operations, so I went to MOH. On my first day, I went into the call center. We actually had a call center in MOH. And when I went in, I realized that everyone there was extremely handsome and beautiful. And I was wondering, something is wrong, right? Why is it that all the good-looking people are there? And because these were Singapore Airlines crew who, because of the grinding of flights, there were no flights, and therefore they pivoted and they were being supported by MOH in order for them to make use of their skill sets. Even when the aircrafts are not flying, they are able to then provide service by talking to people on the phone, assuring them, and sending, in this case, quarantine ambulances to them. My point is, government takes care as much as we can to as many people as we can. And during moments of crisis, especially during COVID, I think you can be sure that all of us will put in our best to make sure that no one is left behind. The PM has said it, and whatever we do are indeed towards that direction as well. And I hope that goes out to all Singaporeans that are out there.
The idea is, I think, staying nimble, staying relevant, no matter what the playing field is. I do hope that message goes out to the people that ultimately you need to do something, and we collectively need to do something, right? So that we can keep going, especially in these tough times. Right. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you love what we do at The Financial Coconut, or go to thefinancialcoconut.com to put your email address so that we can route out the algorithm and reach you directly when we launch new things, or have new events and new things to shout out. So with that, that's all for today's episode. We'll see you next week at Chills with TFC. Bye-bye.
Good. Thank you.